everyone, welcome to another Animation Friday, and today I thought it would be interesting to briefly address a person within animation again. I did a while back some animators that have existed throughout the past, Miyazaki being one of them, um, and I believe a couple of others, although I could be wrong. I believe I addressed Miyazaki as the person, but there's other animation that I did briefly touch upon, for example, Looney Tunes, but I didn't associate it with a particular person since there were a lot of people that were behind Looney Tunes. But today we are going to be addressing Don Bluth animation, in particular sort of his career as an animator. And Don Bluth's story, I think, is actually really interesting because we do get a real sense of someone who sort of had a kind of big transition. Because initially, within the 1950s, he was an animation assistant, or assistant animator, they call it, to the big hits of the 50s that Disney was making. So he was actually a part of Disney before the 70s came around, when he eventually did get involved on a more higher level. So instead of just being an assistant animator, he became an animator for Disney within the 70s. And the films that he worked on include Robin Hood, Winnie the Pooh, and I believe there was one other hit that The Rescuers was the other one that he did focus on. Yeah, the interesting thing about that part of his career is that unlike in the 1950s, where he was kind of able to come and go sort of as he pleased, since I guess he was fairly young during the time, and there were other things that he wanted to sort of do, so he left Disney after being sort of an assistant there. When he came back in the 70s, there wasn't a whole lot going on at Disney, unfortunately, because Walt Disney died in the later 60s, and it was very hard for the company to find that same amount of leadership that Walt had. And Don Bluth, I think, definitely had trouble finding this sense of direction, because Disney didn't have a lot going for it around that time. It didn't have it wasn't the company that it was 20 years ago in the 50s, and earlier 60s. I mean, it didn't have that same caliber of influence. And again, Disney was focused more on doing live action as opposed to animation, so there were a bunch of budget cuts and all this stuff. So really, Don Bluth felt, I think, limited probably with what he could do at Disney, because they were making all these changes and there was not a whole lot of, guidance and leadership. So I think this definitely did play a role in the result of him leaving. It wasn't necessarily the fact that, it was, Disney was, trying to, I mean, it's not like Disney did anything necessarily bad. It almost seemed like Don Bluth left because Disney didn't have a whole lot going for it for animation during the time. So he was like, why not I start my own animated company? And so he did, and he started it from his garage. And sort of the rest is history, because after that we see him ultimately making some good animated films that sort of were on a higher level as far as critically acclaimed than what Disney was making at the time. And these films, three primary ones that came out within the 80s, Again, what was in this, or excuse me, Don was in Disney and during the 70s, and when he left it was around the 80s, and then once the films came out it was pretty much throughout the 80s where he made his big works uh like An American Tail, Secret of Them, Land Before Time, um and and eventually Anastasia, which did become a sort of commercial success, and that was in the 90s. But it pretty much, when you look at his career lineup, those were his three strongest films: The Land Before Time, American Tail, and The Secret of Nim. And after that, after those three films, once the 90s hit, and once Disney made The Little Mermaid, it was pretty much history as far as his animation company was concerned. Because once Disney got on top again, um, it was definitely hard for someone like Don Bluth to compete, because again, Disney had tons of more resources than Don Bluth did, for sure. So that only makes sense that ultimately Disney would come back eventually. But he did want to, I mean, he did sort of create it because he felt like he could rival and bring something new to the table when it comes to animation. And he did this by, again, making his films a little bit more darker. But again, I think he still held on to that Disney kind of optimism, because there's a lot of optimistic elements that you'll see within Don Bluth films. He just gave it a little bit of a darker tone than other Disney films that were really coming out during that time, as well as previous Disney films that came out within the 50s and the 40s too. So, um, yeah, but I mean, he offered, though, something I think very unique, and that I think is definitely something that is worthy of recognition when it comes to animation. It is unfortunate that as as Disney became more popular, his products didn't seem to stack up all too well, unfortunately. But I mean, I could understand um, why, he probably didn't have the resources, he didn't have the caliber to keep it going, so to speak. So I definitely understand that. And also, if anybody is curious too as to why the sudden spike with Anastasia's being a commercial success, well, 20th Century Fox came along and wanted Don Bluth to be a part of the film. So yeah, he had some outside kind of help with that. So it wasn't just his production, so to speak. So yeah, I think that's really ultimately what ended up occurring with Don Bluth's career. But I think it was still a nice. I think it was still nice that he was able to make the three films that he did that were genuinely genuinely successful, either critically or financially. And I think it's good that we had, somebody trying to offer some material within this time of uh, of of a lack of animation. And the interesting thing about Don Bluth now is that he runs his own theater called the Don Bluth Front Row Theater. And he also provides tutorial videos on animation. And again, I think he wanted to kind of be that, in a way, somewhat, I guess, not necessarily a leader, but into so much he wanted to bring out the wisdom of animation, which I think he was lacking while he was at Disney. So that's, I think, something that's very important to note. And I think he's still pretty much going strong from what I can tell. But that's pretty much the story behind Don Bluth. I mean, it's almost pretty straightforward because you can really look at his career based upon how well Disney was doing, whether they weren't doing that well or whether they were doing way better. Except for, again, you had that one film, Anastasia, which again was very commercially successful for him. Even though it wasn't under really necessarily his name. It was on the 20th Century Fox label, but again, at least he was able to find some way to, kind of bring in some money for himself by making a career out of it. And yeah, but I think he's one of those animators that I can see that had a lot of passion behind his ideas and his thoughts, and I think he really sort of paved the way for animators, and I think other animators like Walt Disney and the Fleischers and all those others. I think they would all be happy to see his work, because he brought something, I think, unique that wasn't really there during the time, and I think it's definitely uh, one of those animators that did have a little bit of success, even though it wasn't really as long-lived as maybe some other people's animated careers. But I think he is still one that really does value what he does, and you really have to admire somebody for that who really enjoys their work and what they do. So yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say when it comes to Don Bluth's animation. Um, Again, his stories are more, I guess you could say, childlike, because they again are more, they revolve around animals or or children characters in particular. And again, they have that darker undertone to them that is not present in a lot of other animated works. And I think that's really what made him unique. It's unfortunate that there weren't more films that he made that were like that, but for the short career that he had, was a good ride. It was good to see at least him have some success with the films that he did make. But I think that's really ultimately all I can say about this particular topic. But again, if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year. And I hope to see you on the next video. Take care. Bye.